Welcome to our parlor. This parlor would be your typical upper class, upper middle class family in Mount Holly in the late 1800s, early 1900s. If you notice the sofa over here and the chair, at the table, the lighting, this chair, Victorian style, the phonograph, and of course the piano. This piano was bought by Moses Ryan in 1859 for his daughter, and it was shipped from Baltimore to Charleston and by carriage from Charleston to Mount Holly. And then it was sold to different people in later years, and it came back into the family. And finally, the last family member was the Love family, and they contributed this to the museum. They donated it to the museum. Now, if you lived in this room and you looked out that window, you would find the main street of Mount Holly in the early part of the 1900s. And as you can see, we had unpaved roads, a different skyline, few power poles, carriages, boys dressed in knickers, quite different from what we have today. If you come back into this room, we have wall charts. And this wall chart gives us the census of 1880. And I think there were a little over 2,500 people in Mount Holly in the 1880s. And then if you come over to this wall chart, it says that Woodlawn becomes Mount Holly. And Woodlawn was started by Dr. James Abernathy, who lived in River Bend at the time, and he's buried at Castina Cemetery. And he had a medical practice and was active in civic affairs, and he was one of the founding fathers of Mount Holly. His son also, who became a textile magnate, and also was involved in banking and other textiles in other communities. He was a founding father, as well as J.P.B. Rutledge, who was among the first settlers in the county, having received a land grant in 1753. He was the second mayor in Mount Holly and very active in civic affairs. He supported funding electric street lights while he was an alderman, and he was a tax collector, a registrar for elections, and a justice of the peace for over 40 years. He was a well-respected teacher who taught at a one-room school and a school in McAdenville before founding the River Bend School near Mount Holly. And also, we have A.P. Ryan, Abel Peterson Ryan, who was a founding father. He fought in the Civil War under Stonewall Jackson. And in 1869, he purchased his father's share in Woodlawn Cotton Factory, going on to become a leading figure in the textile industry in North Carolina. The town of Mount Holly was named after Mount Holly Mill, built by A.P. Ryan and his brother Daniel Eford Ryan, when the village was still known as Woodlawn. According to legend, in the early 1880s, A.P. had Thomas Edison install a generator in the Mount Holly Manufacturing Company. This allowed him to provide electricity for other businesses. Later, he signed a contract to provide electricity for the first 3 streetlights in Mount Holly. So these are the founding fathers. And then if you look at this particular chart, it tells you that we were known as Woodlawn, and then we became Mount Holly. as we were a part of Lincoln County and eventually formed our own county, Gaston County. If you disregard the dressings, the clothing, and the charts on the wall, you have this particular room, which is known as the parlor, the living room. And we thought we would bring the fashions of the day, late 1800, early 1900, into this room. And all of the fashions that you see today were worn by Mount Holly natives or somebody who was related to the Mount Holly natives. And notice that all these clothes are dress-up clothes. These dresses were worn when ladies went out to shop, or if they went to church, or if they had a party, because everybody dressed up before they went out. And all of these dresses are dressy dresses. And I will call your attention to the one dress, the black dress here, and the black dress over here. This black dress is what we call a mourning dress. When somebody died, there was an age of mourning, and people wore these black coat-like things to show their grief. And then this is the typical hat of the late 1800s, very early 1900s, real big. And the ladies supported these hats because they had the long hair and the big Gibson-type buns on their head. Notice the shoes, lace-up, high-top lace-up shoes, which were very popular at the time. And there's one dress that is not a fancy dress, and that's this dress, which is a cotton dress that people wore when they were doing their chores. And they were 100% cotton, most of them, and they were worn so long that they became ragged and were actually torn up into rags. And that's why you don't see so many of them. These children's clothes are dress-up clothes. They only wore them for special occasions. And these clothes were about 1914. And this is a little boy's outfit with the tam. And this is a little girl's outfit, which is displayed on an Edwardian doll. And it's a wire hat and a little white dropped waist dress. And this is a little boy's outfit, which features these shoes. And these shoes are not lace-up and not Velcro. They're button shoes. And they usually had a little device that they could use to help them button these shoes. This is not authentic. This is a reproduction of a little girl's dress that would have been worn in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Over here, this is authentic. This is a christening robe that was worn at the same time period. And that's a christening dress, which was 1910, that a little boy wore. If you want to see what these ladies wore under these dresses, you look back on that back wall. These were bodices that women wore in the top part of their clothes. And we have some other bodices over here. And they also wore pantaloons, or I don't know what we would call the pantaloons. And some ladies would wear over their pantaloons these big heavy slips, petticoats. They were called petticoats. And we've got about 7 of them here, and we made a tablecloth out of all of them. And they're beautifully made. And some ladies, if they really wanted to be in style in the late 1800s, they would wear what we would call a bustle. And we have a bustle here. Bustle is extra padding that you would put on your back to lift a skirt, and they were made out of wire or rags or batting, and they gave a bump right back here, and it was to lift the skirt so it wouldn't drag along the road or the streets, and sometimes they just wore them because they were stylish. We have stockings that women wore. And can you imagine, underneath the heavy clothes that they wore all of this as well. We also have a nightcap over here that they wore in bed. And this is a bonnet, late 1800s, that people might wear when they're weeding the garden or working outside. And we have here also the stiff collars that ladies and men wore around their necks. And we also have these hat pins that were anywhere from 5 to 10 inches long that held these big hats on people's heads. If you look back here, you can see the nightgowns that they wore, heavy nightgowns. This is a robe, a silk robe, and these are everyday dresses that are made out of cotton that we don't have many of. And this is like a negligee back here and a bed coat. Over here we have late 1800s, early 1900s hats. We have the Panama hat, and we have the derby hat, and we have the flat hat. This preceded the baseball cap that men wear today. And we have two hats up here, and this hat that ladies wore, and this hat was called the Titanic hat because they found that a lot of the ladies who were on the Titanic, the maiden voyage of the Titanic, a lot of those ladies wore those hats, that style hat, in 1912. And then again we have some little boy shoes from the same time period. These are lace-up shoes, and these are the button shoes that were worn in that time period. And this is the thing that they used to button their shoes with. Over here, we have probably, I guess, the main attraction of this clothing exhibit. We have up here, the 1960s, we have a green party dress and a blue party dress. And a lot of these dresses were worn with what we call crinolines. And crinolines were a stiff slip that made your dress stand out. And that was popular in the middle 1800s as well as the middle 1900s. This is our wedding exhibit, and we'll start here with this dress right here. This is a little flower girl's dress that Betty Benton wore in the 1950s at one of her aunt's weddings. And she, I think, was the grandniece of Dr. Stroop, who was one of the doctors in Mount Holly. And her mother was mother of the bride, this dress here. This is a wedding dress. It's blue velvet with a blue velvet hat. And it was when the Curtises, Grays, were married in Louisiana. And they're related to Paul Howe, who was a great-grandson of the superintendent of Mountain Island Mill. Then this picture shows us Dubby Hendrick, who was married in 1950. We don't have her dress, but we have her picture. And then this was Margaret Farah, who was married in the 1920s. and this is her dress. It could have been Margaret or Ella. I don't know which. This is a homemade wedding gown out of silk or satin. And this was worn by Talitha Hem. And she is pictured in this picture in 1941 with the same dress. This is a bridesmaid's dress with a dropped waistline, applique on the shoulder, and it was the 1920s. And this person probably was related to Miss Ida Rankin, who was the namesake of Rankin Elementary School. And this beautiful dress was very formal. This was when Miss Elizabeth Connell married Thomas Marcus Brown in 1950. And this was her wedding dress, and this is her picture in that very dress. And then this dress is not white, of course, not long, not formal. This is the dress of Willie Ruth Horton when she married Marvel Macklin Green in 1947. And a lot of brides after the war wore these types of dresses for the weddings. And then we have Miss Dameron, Elizabeth Dameron, when she married Billy Fox in I think it was really 48. And this is a a white satin dress. We inherited this from somewhere. We don't know exactly where. We don't know the bride, but this was the style of the 1970s. This dress is the mother of the bride dress. Miss Debbie Kendrick wore this to her daughter's wedding, which was right over there. And then we have this nightgown and robe, handmade, was part of the trousseau of one of the relatives of Betty Benton, and it was in the 1940s. This is what brides often wore on their honeymoon. And one last thing I'd like to show you are the jewelry of Miss Stroop, and her husband was one of the ones that set up a grocery store in Mount Holly, Belmont area, and it became the basis of Food Line. And these are her pieces of jewelry that she wore, along with her gloves. And she's also the owner, as well as Miss Debbie Kendrick Brinkley, who owned these hat boxes that a lot of us find familiar because they're from stores that we knew when we were younger. And this is our clothing exhibit.
Just want to point out a little artifact in our museum. This is an original ballot box when you voted. We have it in the museum now. On the top is a sample ballot from the city of Mount Holly. It was their regular municipal election in 1971. It gives you instructions how to do it, how to fill it out. You vote for a candidate by making a cross or an X in the square left of the name. And if you tear, deface, or wrongly mark this ballot, you need to return it and get another one. Also, mark only with a pencil or with a pen and ink. For mayor during that time, we had Adrian Beatty, Ray Broom, and Jack Taylor. I do not know who won back then, but this was very interesting. Today we use it for our donations as they come in the museum. The next little thing I'm going to show you is our old telephone that we have acquired. I don't know how old or the date, but it was when you dialed the telephone and you only had a couple digits to dial to make it work. So we have children come in and we talk about this telephone, And if you pick it up, it's pretty heavy. You know, so we let them pick up the arm, and we let them say, if you want to dial someone, you dial this, so you can put your finger in there. And they did, and then they didn't know what to do after that, so we made sure they could go all the way around here and just let it go back. And you dial the number, and then you talk. You talk like this through this telephone. Now, their telephones today are pretty much computers, but they love this telephone. They like to work it, and they're just in awe of how it works. And so we like to share that with them. I used to have one at my house, but and you didn't have any privacy because you only had one phone, and it was like right there in the kitchen, right near my kitchen table. But it did have a long extension cord, so I could just swing around to my bedroom, get the cord up under the door, and sit right in the corner there and talk to my boyfriend on the phone. So it's really neat, that history. This is also, I thought, cute. It's from the Bell telephone system, and it says it's fun to phone. A minute from now, you can be having a happy time. Just phone someone who means a lot to you. True happiness is the kind you share, and nothing helps you to do so easily as your telephone. So it is fun to phone. Back in the day. Okay, the next thing I'm going to share with you is our timeline. Our timeline starts back at 1750. It goes all the way to 2016, so we need to do some updating for sure. It gives our pretty much a little time history of our town of Mount Holly. We have history in here of the wars that were started, you know, at the time, like the Revolutionary War on up. We have our schools history in here, especially the textile mills that were popular back in the day. We have some church history. We have a few little inventions along the way, and maybe some interesting facts along the way. So we're going to share a little bit all the way down. Back in the 1750s, James Kuykendall settled on Fishing Creek, which is now our Dutchman Creek. We had Catawba Indians down here, and in 1763 they moved to South Carolina because of the smallpox outbreak. So we know how devastating that was for them. In 1768, Tryon County was formed from Mecklenburg County, so I guess that's before we had Gaston County. And then there is the history, the local battles here in Ramesses Mill, Kings Mountain area during the Revolutionary War. In 1779, Lincoln County formed from the eastern part of Tryon County. Let's see, in 81, Robert Beatty taught school in the area. Now, schools back in that time maybe were on farms and maybe one-room schoolhouses. So in 1789 is when North Carolina became the 12th state. So there you go. 1796, Robert Alexander. This is a famous home we talk about that was here in Mount Holly. He hosted Andre Michaux, who was a French botanist and explorer. This house sat on the corner of Hawthorne and Central Avenue. In 1796, the Shiloh AME Zion Church opens. So that was pretty early. In the 1800s, there were slaves in our area. They were purchased, and the first African Americans were incorporated in our population. In 1801, Humphrey Hunter becomes the first postmaster at Woodlawn, which is what Mount Holly was called before it became incorporated. And this is a map showing in 1808 the Woodlawn's location. I was trying to find it, on here, and I didn't see, but it's got to be right in this area. Okay, and moving on down. In 1837, Samuel Morse and other inventors developed a telegraph. And to simplify complex messages, Morse code creates a unique transmission code. And that's a little diagram of that. In 1839, this is a post office map. Okay. In 1840, Wilmington, Charlotte, and the Rutherford Railroad were first to enter Gaston County. In 1843, St. Joseph's Church becomes Gaston County's first Catholic church and the fourth in North Carolina. And it is still standing up there on North Main Street. In 1846, the southern half of Lincoln County now becomes Gaston County. In 1848, Thomas Tate builds the Mountain Island Mill, the first textile mill in Gaston County, north of Woodlawn, which was Mount Holly. Okay. 1860 to 65, Civil War. Okay, in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell is credited with the first successful bidirectional transmission of clear speech on the telephone. In 1874, Mount Holly Cotton Mill was opened by A.P. Ryan, Daniel Ryan, and Ambrose Costner, igniting the county's industrial explosion through our mills. And also during this time, 1877, there was invention of the phonograph by Thomas Edison. We have one of those in our in our museum. Thomas Edison produced a reliable, long-lasting electric light bulb in his laboratory. And we're grateful for light, and I've heard some history that's kind of how our first street light got started. In 1881, the Union Church was established as a community church. I think it was just a little wooden building at the time, and it was right on the main street where the Lutheran Church is now. Every denomination went there. It was just kind of the beginnings of going to church in Mount Holly. In 1883, Tuckasegee Manufacturing Company opens, another one of our mills. In the 1850s to the 1920s, a hunter school opened. In 1873, we had the Wells School that operated. And prior to 1875, 2 different Lucius schools operated. So these are some of the very first schools in Mount Holly. 1880s, Piney Grove School was built in the Lucia area. We're going to find out some more about the schools as we go along. In 1890, the Mount Holly Knitting Company opens, and this is currently the municipal building where our city hall is, in the Grand Hall. In 1891, C.E. Hutchinson and Partners built the NIMS Manufacturing Company that later consolidated and formed our A&E mills, which are still working today. This is just a picture of one of the Tucker Springs general stores that was in our Mount Holly. 1893, A.P. Ryan installs a generator at the Mount Holly Cotton Mill, supplying power to local businesses and for street lights, hence the Thomas Edison had a part in that. We're going into the 1900s now. 1905, the Duke brothers incorporate Southern Power Company into Duke Power, the first used hydroelectric power through dams on the Catawba River, like the one at Mountain Island. It's right here. That's the Woodlawn Manufacturing Company, first electrified mill in Mount Holly. In 1906, H.C. Irwin became the first Mount Holly Chief of Police. Right here we have a little picture of 1914, our Mount Holly Fire Department. And I think this was located on Main Street also. In 1911, the Piedmont Northern Railroad Station was built in Mount Holly. My mama used to always just call it the P&N. In 1917, of course, the United States enters into World War I. This is our famous flood that we had in 1916 that was very devastating. The Catawba River, of course, is nearby, and lost Lutz Bridge, and we lost a mill, and that's just a little portion of the devastation. In 1920, American Yarn and Processing Company opened its doors. In 1923, the Mountain Island Hydroelectric Plant opens. 1929, Riverbend Steam Station opens. And guess what? Gone with the Wind, the famous movie, in 1939 was released. Up here we have a picture of the first North Carolina State Highway Patrol car. This was donated by Gene Bynum. So that kind of gives us a little history of the police department. Let's see. I'll go back up here because this is talking about some of the early schools again. 1902 to 03, the graded school was built near the current downtown Mount Holly. In 1910 and 17 and 1924, there were Mount Holly school buildings were completed, and these are the ones that stood where Ida Rankin is today. The early 20s, there were 6-room school building was completed in Lucia, which the schools got started early there. In 1923, a teacherage was completed for teachers serving the Mount Holly schools, and the Lucia schools also had a teacherage up there, I believe. The teacherage was located right below where Ida Rankin is. It was a home. It looked like a home, and they had individual rooms, and single teachers lived there, and it was walking distance to the school, so it was convenient. They shared maybe a kitchen and dining area, and there could have been couples there later on. So in 1927, the Mount Holly High School was completed. It actually then was torn down in 1981 because of the new one that was built there. This one stood on Hawthorne Street. It faced Hawthorne Street. And across the street were some older buildings that are still there that were used for home ec classes and other classrooms, and the old auditorium was across from there. In the 1930s, the Mount Holly Colored School opened for African American students. That's what it was called back then. Later on, it became the A.B. Rollins School that was located on Hawthorne Street. In 1938, we had a band room in the gymnasium that was added, and the auxiliary buildings that I was talking about before. And back to the Lucia School, the pre-1940s, there was a 4-room school building that was completed in Lucia. So that's a little bit of a snippet of that. Some more church history. In 1911, Tuckasegee Baptist, the Unity Church that I talked about before, once the other denominations became able to build their own churches, and that's where they started. 1912, Shiloh African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. 1932, Wesley Chapel Holiness Church. In the 38, Adrian Medora Church was formed by the First Baptist Church. It was later called Second Baptist Church. 1940, St. Paul Church. 1949, Catawba Heights Baptist Church. Today. Of course, in World War II, 1941, we entered into that stage of World War history. Here are some veterans that were in World War II. Mount Holly. Norman, David, and Charlie Cox were all brothers, and they all served in the war together. That's not commonly done, I think, these days, taking a whole family. Edwin Springs, Russell Hart, and George Devereaux, Jr. Now we're coming back into the 1950s. Let's see. So 1952, the Mount Holly School Auditorium was completed. And 53, the Costner Field was completed for the Mount Holly High School. That's where we had all our good football games where everybody came, the whole town. 1954, the Supreme Court decides Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, ruling segregated schools unconstitutional. And that's when, in the 60s, we'll see that the white and black children went to school together. This is just a little snippet of something interesting. This is a telegram. In 1955, WCGC, the radio station, was first broadcast. This telegram is from Frank Sinatra. And it says, may you enjoy many, many successes with the new station, WCGC. My best wishes to all of you. And it's signed Frank Sinatra. That was back in 1955 in January. That's a little cool thing to know. In 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird, the book was published. We also had the high school was replaced in 1960 when they built the newer one, and it was torn down. In 1964, LBJ signs the civil rights legislation. In 67, we had an addition to the Mount Holly High School. And this is a little more of the history of our schools, the graded schools. In 1951, first and second grade building completed for Mount Holly schools. Now, I actually went into that building because it was added to the three older buildings, and I went to first grade in that building. It's a cinder block built building, and it's still up there at Ida Rankin. So the kindergartners go there now. In 1952, Mount Holly School Auditorium was completed. In 59, Catawba Heights Elementary School opened, serving southern Mount Holly students. So we're not just Mount Holly schools anymore. 1960s, Mount Holly Colored School was renamed A.M. Rollins Elementary to honor its first principal. When they built that school, they would go through 8th grade, and then they would go to Belmont to Reed High School before they integrated into the school system, which was in 1965. In 72, Ida Rankin School was open. The buildings, the three buildings that I was talking about, they were torn down and that were built then. And also on 72, we had East Gaston High School open, consolidating Mount Holly schools and the Stanley High Schools. The former high schools became middle schools in each town. In 1970, Pinewood Elementary School opened, serving northern Mount Holly students. So you can see as the population grew, the schools were growing too. Okay, let's see. 1970, Burge Memorial United Methodist Church was built. 1972, this is what we mentioned before. East Gaston was constructed and becomes, this is a picture of Ida Rankin here in 72. So that was a big explosion. We got a new elementary school and we got a new high school. In 1981, when the Mount Holly Junior High School was demolished and replaced with a parking lot for Mount Holly Middle School, that was the old high school building that was torn down. So, okay, we're going to come over to the year 2000. A devastating event, 2001, that's when the terrorist attack in New York, in Washington, D.C., and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In 2009, the Mount Holly Municipal Complex opens. That was the old mill that was down there. It was renovated to house all of Mount Holly's city offices. In 2010, Mount Holly Historical Society forms. Yay! That's us. Also in 2010, the Mountain Island Charter School. It's the first charter school in Mount Holly is open. Okay, and then in 2013, we have another new high school opening, Stuart Kramer High School, drawing students from Mount Holly and Belmont areas. And then, sadly, our timeline kind of ends in 2016, but well, this was an event that we had remembering our comeback from the Great Flood in 1916. There were food trucks and live music and a kids zone, and so they were just commemorating that period of time. And that ends the portion of the timeline we have now, so we know we got work to do. We need to start it back up. So.
Good morning. Welcome to the Mount Holly Historical Society's athletic room. This is a combination of history, Mount Holly's history, and I'd like to start off with the band, which I was a part of. And Mr. Robert Black was my band director for years and years and years. A great man, and on Friday night, everybody came out to the ball games. It was, the whole community came out and supported, and it was a community event that everybody loved. And this is one thing, when I do tours of the athletic room, this is one thing that I think everybody loves. This is the school song that was played after every touchdown. If you got 10 touchdowns, you heard the school song. And somebody taped the original one, and this is what it sounds like. These are the words. Fame to the name of Holly High, the finest high school in the land. And her might we will praise till the end of her days. She's our alma mater grand. Sing while you cling to Holly High. May our memories never die. Loyal sons we will be till eternity. Hail to thee, Mount Holly High. Okay, this is the drum that we used in the band. It was very instrumental in all our work that we did with the band, whether it was marching or when we would go to concerts and things like that. And we always were rated #1 in our concert season. Mr. Black always made sure that we were well prepared in anything that we did. Great man. And this right here was donated to the Historical Society by Cecilia Grosh Broom. My mother, it was originally my uniform that my mother made in 1966. I was head twirler before Cecilia, not knowing that it would end up in the Historical Society one day, and the boots and everything else that we wore during halftime. And during our halftimes, Mr. Black was very well known for his lights outs. And what he would do, the band people would put a flashlight on their uniform, and the lights would all go out, and people would turn their flashlights on, and we would do different things out on the field. And the majorettes would twirl fire batons. Oh yes, we would hold them up, and then when the band started playing, we twirled our fire batons. We were well known for that also. And you know, I look back on it, and I don't know if I'd let my child do it today, but anyway. This tells something about our band that was formed in 1928. Like I said, here is the 1930 Mount Holly High School band, a little different from the one in 1955 and 56. Everybody, a lot of people wanted to be in the band because Mr. Black was such a great man and encouraged us in so many ways, not just in music, but in our everyday life. And he was really like a second father to me and to a lot of kids that I knew. But anyway, and this is the some of the awards that we have won over the year in football, some of the championship footballs, some of the band hats that they wore, and anybody that would come in that went to Mount Holly, East Gaston, or anything would remember all of these, and it was really a great time in my life and other people's. Here's another great man, Mr. Delmer Wiles, was the head football coach for years and years. A lot of teams, championship teams you can see were under him, and to this day, men still talk about how he whipped them into shape and made them the men they are today. He was an ex-Marine, and I think he used a lot of that on our young guys, but we all respected this man and looked up to him. You can see some of our original helmets here. This is a 1960 helmet from the Mount Holly Hawks. This is Coach Dick Thompson's original helmet made out of leather. So if you want to see that, come in and see it, and it tells the history of it right here. Over here we have a lot of history about the different teams, how some of the mill teams started in this is 1917. Mount Holly was founded on the mills that started up here in Mount Holly, and they made mill teams and built places for them to play, and the different mills competed against each other. And that shows one of the original mill teams that they had. And I can remember as a real young girl going to Tuckasegee Mill athletics. But you just come and you can turn these and see some of the history of Mount Holly. Here's some of this is championship things that people have donated here in the Historical Society that will be with us forever, that people can remember. Just looking at these, you can remember the event and what happened, and we can pass it on to future generations. And as we give tours here in the Historical Society, young school kids come in here and they have so many questions, and we show them pictures out of the annuals and everything. They get to relive our history, and they're so excited. And they see pictures. It's not like reading a book or anything. They actually get to see the real history, and we tell them the history behind it. They're so excited. They have millions of questions, and it's really exciting for us to pass it on to them. Here is a cheerleading outfit from the 50s and 60s. I don't know who donated it, but still in pretty good shape. I can imagine how many ball games and basketball games this has been to. And over here we have some memorabilia. This is, I remember this from the 50s and 60s, band uniform, which today could be very controversial, but was, you know, something that we enjoyed when I was in band in the 8th grade. This here is probably one of the football boys or basketball, or this is a letter jacket that the boys wore. You saw everybody wearing their letter jackets, and it meant a lot to them. I hope that young men today can get back to this and have the pride that these young men did when they were growing up. This was Mr. Black's director uniform. Like I said, he was a great man, meant a lot to a lot of kids. I started band in the 4th grade. Mr. Black liked to get his kids started in band and get their interest at a young age. So I started in the 4th grade coming over and taking band during the day, and they allowed that. And I went on to graduate 12th grade and knew him like a dad. He meant a lot to me growing up and to other people in school. He was a great man. And over here we have our basketball, golf, other things. This right here, number 18, these are the basketball uniforms the girls wore. I'll show you a picture of number 18 here. Right here it is, number 18. There's the original uniform right there. And as we show the kids, as we take our groups through here, we try to show this, and the kids are so excited to see these pictures and go back in history and actually see them in these annuals. They love it. And like I said, they have so many questions. And we even have kids that bring their parents in here because of their visit with the Historical Society with their classes. And then they have so many more stories and questions that they asked, and it's exciting for us to bring it alive here in the Historical Society. So thank you for coming, and just come anytime.
I'm Nancy Wren. I'm on the board of the Historical Society, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of the schools in Mount Holly. Over here on our board, it says that the early 1700s to early 1800s, children were educated at home on farms. First individually, then as groups at centrally located farms. So Robert Beatty's home, located near the Tuckasegee Ford, was used as a schoolhouse as early as 1781. In the 1800s, there were several one-room schoolhouses were constructed to serve the local children. These schools often bore the names of the landowners on which they were constructed. These schools were supported by the state for 4 months of the year, and children who did not attend one of the state-supported schools attended a paid school. And there's a little list of some here. Churches like the Macedonia Baptist Church near Lucia taught African American children. The first school building for African American children was built in the 1930s, and it was called the Mount Holly Colored School. So in 1902, a bond election resulted in the opening of a graded school in 1903, Mount Holly's first multi-room school building. It had 2 stories, it had 10 classrooms, and it was located on North Main Street near the current location of the First Methodist Church. And this is a picture of it right up here. And you can see how the teachers here and the children are lined up going into the school. So it is known that there have been some one-room schoolhouses in Mount Holly. Some of these schoolhouses had maybe just one room. They had like a bench that went all around the edge of the room, and that was where they, sort of like this, where they had that was their desk. They didn't have normal desks like we see now. And then they had just a little bench that they sat on. And they had a fireplace. The teacher had just a small desk area and a stool to on, and then there were several grades in there. She would be teaching children of all ages. There was not much furniture in there, and of course there was no plumbing, so you had to go to the woods for toileting purposes. So that's the very beginning of the schools. This was the next school that would be on Main Street. And then if we come over here, the first building of the Mount Holly School looked like this building here. It was built in 1910. It was the first of 3 buildings that would be on that lot where Ida Rankin School is now. The second and third buildings were built, one in 1916 and the other in 1923. This is an aerial view of it, and you can see the 3 buildings here. And then this portion was added on to the first building at a later date. So these 3 buildings I actually went to school in. The first building had first and second grade. The addition that I talked about here was where I went to first grade. There was no kindergarten then. The second building, which was the middle building, the lower level had the big cafeteria, and the children from each building had to come outside, go into the middle building to eat. The cafeteria was home cooked food, cooked on site, nothing brought in. Had the best yeast rolls. They just had soup day. Our teacher would teach us the correct way to eat soup. How you would move the spoon this way and back to your mouth, the correct way. And so teachers were teaching even at lunchtime. But the food was really good. And nobody went home hungry, that was for sure. And I know that because my mom used to work in the cafeteria. And so we knew what went on in there. The third building had 3rd and 4th graders in it, and the principal's office was over there when I was in that building. Then the top level of the middle building was 5th grade. And I remember that building because it was way up high. When we had fire drills, there was an old iron fire escape that went down the side of the building. We didn't go down our normal steps. When the fire bell rang, we had to go out that little tiny entrance down there. So, let's see. We'll move on over here because there were more schools in Mount Holly. And the newer Mount Holly School was built. So, over here we have, let's see, this is the school where we're talking about the Black American School. It was called the A.M. Rollins School. It was renamed, of course, and then following the decision in 1954 and the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, A.M. Rollins had to close because at that point in time, the African American children were put in the public schools with the white children. So the desegregation began in the schools in the mid-1960s. And I remember that because I was in the 6th grade when that happened. Let's see. the Mount Holly High School, the first one that was built, was in 1927. This was the first school, first Mount Holly High School. It was built on Hawthorne Street. That, when I went to school, that ended up being the middle school or the junior high school. It was eventually torn down and they built the a new high school, Mount Holly High School, which now is the middle school. So they tore this building down. But there were some buildings across the street from this building that were used as a home ec room. We had an auditorium across there, and then the gym for the basketball gym and the band room was across the street. Those buildings are still up. I don't know if they use the auditorium or the other buildings or not, but now the gym, of course, is used for Mount Holly recreation. So those buildings are still here. So let's see. This is talking about the Mount Holly Auditorium. That was built in 1952. The Costner Field, which is named after a man, I can't remember his first name, was completed in 1953. That's where we had all our football games, and that was a Friday night tradition. The whole town would come out for the football games. So that field now is used for the middle school. So then in 1972, East Gaston High School was built. That's when the two towns, Stanley and Mount Holly, came together. They both go to East Gaston High School. I was in the first graduating class of that school, so it's over 50 years old already. And so that was the new high school. Let me talk about the Lucia School over here, because this school was an elementary school that was located up on 16 if you go out 273. The first two Lucia elementary schools existed before 1875. Each one was a one-room building with an open fireplace and seats made of wooden slabs. Drinking water was carried in a bucket from a nearby spring. Now, here's one, Lucia School in 1913. Here's some of the student body, a picture of them in the 1913. But look over here at 1898, what the folks looked like that go to school there. They, I think, eventually had an auditorium that was constructed near Snow Hill Methodist Church. Gasoline mantle lamps were used to provide artificial light, and eventually a lavatory with a drinking fountain was installed in the room. In the 1880s, because the second building burned down, the Piney Grove School was built. And it was a one-room heated with a wood-burning stove, had seats similar to church pews, and a portion of the wall was painted black and used for the blackboard. Okay, let's see. And here's a picture of first and second graders. There was a teacher called Alma Thompson. This was from 1920 to 1930. Even in 1895, Robert Connell taught in a new one-room school located where the Lucia teacherage now stands. And here's a picture of that, the Lucia teacherage. So all the district schools were consolidated by 1928, and buses were introduced. So children no longer had to walk as far as 3 miles to school anymore. And these elementary children went through 8th grade, and then they came to Mount Holly, to the Mount Holly schools. So the history of the Mount Holly schools was very important to the town, because as the town grew, more population, more schools were built. I wanted to point out we had a teacherage here in Mount Holly, It opened in 1923 on land purchased from the Hutchinson family. The brick building had 15 decorated rooms, and it was an attractive option for new teachers needing a place to live and being in walking distance to the school in Mount Holly. There's some of the teachers that were listed here that actually lived there. Some were single women, but they did have couples occasionally, and they used a community kitchen that had rooms, and then there was a kitchen there. So it operated until the 1950s, and then it was empty for a while until it was torn down in 1972, and then that's when Ida Rankin was built. So they, I guess, acquired the land for that. I don't know. So it was located right below where Ida Rankin was. You could just walk up the sidewalk and go to school, teach. This is an old, I don't know if you can get a close-up, it's very old. It is a report card from Mount Holly High School. It was from Jim Tucker. It's dated September the 12th, 1921. It's a little tattered and torn, but that's what they looked like back then. Here's a picture of some Mount Holly students in 1917. And this was a replica of the 1916-17 The Holly, which was Mount Holly's first school newspaper that was published. Subscription rates were 25 cents a year. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, let's see. I was going to show some things that were in here, the history of our schools. These are all some of the little school books, the pictures, annuals, I guess, what you would call. We have some that are very old, but those are in here. There's this was famous for some reason back in the day when they would put some books together. They would be wooden. I don't know the reason for that. But this was from an English teacher, and even my mother had a poem in here. I looked through it and didn't even know it. But back in the day when she went to high school, there was her English teacher was teaching, you know, the different kinds of poems, how you can write them, and then there's stories in here too that they wrote. So the poems that my mom wrote, it was one of the poems where you tell the story, give some facts, and then by the end you're supposed to know who you're talking about. And so when I read it, I knew that she was talking about my grandmother, my mother, her mother. So that was the coolest thing. Alright. I don't know if you know about the Mahoscos, was the little paper for the high school. And we have one as early as 1943 in here. The Mahosco, this is not the one I was going to show you, because this is the one that's like typed on a typewriter, okay? So it looks like this. The reason it's called Mahosco is it's M-O for Mount, H-O for Holly, S-C-O for school. That's how they got their name, Mahosco. So you can tell it's written on a, this is very old, it's written, typed up with a typewriter. And we've got some of those from all the way to like the 82s. So they changed every year. And it was always fun to read it because it was like what was going on in the school. Who was seeing who and writing this and that about the fun things that were happening in school. Okay, so let's see. What's in there? We do have a collection of every high school, you know, every now and again has a reunion. And sometimes they, like this one from 1951 class, they made a little booklet, and so they donated that. So we have several things with pictures in them for some of the high school reunions that might be interesting for those who went to high school. And you'll notice the desk here are all different kinds and sizes. All of these desks came from the old Mount Holly schools. I don't know which schools and whatever. And then, of course, the chalkboard that each child might use whenever they were practicing their writing or maybe their math. These desks were used, they had runners and they would attach to the one in front of them. So you can see this is just the desk part, and then there would be another part sitting here. They all work differently. The desks are, you put your books in the bottom of some of them. Some of them you put in the top up here. Some of them you don't have much to put anywhere over there. So, let's see. I just wanted to point out this book is an old book, pupil's book. It's the history of the United States. The copyright is 1895. It belonged to William J. Springs. He was born in 1894 and graduated from Mount Holly School in 1911. He practiced dentistry on Main Street over Summey's Drugstore from 1917 to 1940. So that is a really neat book to look. This is a book. It's one of our first readers. It was a sight and phonics book, phonetic reading. And it has lessons in here. And if you look closely, you can see that if you know your short vowel sounds and your long vowel sounds, they are marked with the appropriate little symbol. And then if you had a silent letter, that's marked out. And that's how the children were taught to read with phonics. And I think this one, was 1908. So, I don't know. So that one's cute. Now, most people don't write in cursive writing anymore, but way back in the day, they had a writing book. And this book taught you exactly how to sit in the proper position to write, to hold your pencil, and then there's lessons of exactly how to make each letter and a drill session. So there's over 100 lessons in here on how to form the letters of the alphabet in cursive writing. It even has the numbers out here, 0 to 9. So that was very interesting. Of course, now I don't think kids learn how to write in cursive, because my grandson had a choice to sign a petition, and he wrote his name, and then there's always a place to write your name in cursive. He said, I can't sign this because I don't know how to write in cursive. So times change over the time. So over here we have a collection of annuals from the schools. The Mount Holly School annuals, high school, date back to 1930. And then all the way to Mount Holly in 72, when of course it started to be East Gaston then. So they were called the Mount Holly Hawks. And it's just amazing that the 1930 one was a Mount Holly Hawk, and all the way up here in the 70s it still was called the Holly Hawk. And then East Gaston, we have a collection of those here. And then these are some Mount Holly Junior High annuals. They were a little bit smaller, so we have a few of those. This is an awards, Scholastic Awards plaque from Mount Holly High School from grade 9, 10, and grade 11. This was back in the 60s, so if you come and look at this and you were in school back then, you'll recognize a lot of these names on there. That was the smart people. Okay. This little machine was one that you could put a quarter in, push this lever, and your pencil would come out here if you didn't have a pencil to write with that day. So that's a neat little machine. These are some of our principals along the way. This was a superintendent in 1930s, and this is Reverend F.B. Rankin. He was principal in 1930s. This is Andrew Rollins, the black school was named for. Then we have a superintendent here in the 1940s. One of the principals I remember, Laxton Hamrick and Brian Craig, they were high school principals. And Alan Craig was our elementary principal for a long time. He was my principal when I went to school there. And then one of our teachers, Scott Griffin, who is still teaching today at Ida Rankin, this is his 51st year. And in 1966, he was the North Carolina Teacher of the Year. So he really loves teaching. I don't know if he'll ever give it up. This is an old typewriter. If you've never seen one, I don't know how old or if there's a date on it or anything. I know we always, when I was in high school, took typing on the old, manual typewriters. But this is definitely older than that. So this is when the Mount Holly High School got its charter for the Beta Club. And this is dated February in 1935. So I thought that was pretty interesting. This, of course, is an old chalkboard that hung on the wall, and it has some of the letters, the cursive letters that you would be writing. And we have a little collection that's under these cabinets of scrapbooks about the schools, and each one, is a little different. This one's older because it's got this wooden backing, and of course the pages are yellow. But it was made, I thought, very decorative. How they, laid out a classroom. There's the projection room, I guess, where they could. I don't know if you saw movies on it or what. Man's achievements through the ages. And then I guess this is what the room looked like, the desk at that time. And then they had sports, just anything. These were drawn, so I thought that was pretty neat. And this one, of course, and a lot of the others that we have, had articles from the paper about their school, maybe what happened that year. This was the year, let's see, I think it was on the back here, 56 to 57. So this one, let's see I don't know if it said or not, maybe the first page, 57. So anyway, we have several of those in cabinets over there too. And this clock, if we can show you, was one of the clocks that was in the elementary school in Mount Holly. I'm not sure exactly where, but I'm thinking it might have been in the principal's office somewhere. And you'll notice it's painted the same green as that bookshelf over there. And it came out of the Mount Holly schools too. This is one of the posters up here of the Dick and Jane school books, reading books that we used to use. And let's see. Oh, and I wanted to mention the slide rule. Let's see. I wanted to show you the slide rule up here, which is It's like an analog computer that was invented in the 17th century. It can be used for multiplication, division, and more complicated calculations. The use of the slide rule ended though quickly in the 1970s, but it would slide out. But we've got a little nail there, so I guess to keep people from doing it back and forth. Then as we grew, Pinewood School was built in '69. That's another elementary school. And then Catawba Heights School was built in '59. So still we're branching out, even in when East Gaston, some of our students from high school go to Stuart Cramer School now, Stuart Cramer High School. So we're spreading out even beyond the town. This desk used to belong to Glenda Rollins. She was a first-year teacher at Mount Holly High School, and the one that's presently now the middle school. She said they had the opportunity, since the school was new that year that she started, to have an old desk from the old Mount Holly School, or they could have one of the new desks, and she opted to get one of the old ones. And so she donated this last year. This desk is kind of unique. She did have to clean it up a little bit or whatever, but it has this place in the middle that folds down for your typewriter. And when you didn't need your typewriter anymore, you could pull this handle up and it would come up and then be even with the desk, so you'd have more desk room. So I was going to step into some drawers. It has 3 drawers on each side. But she said later on that some of the other teachers were very jealous because her desk was much bigger than the new ones that they had ordered. So that's really cool. And I think I've pretty much gone all around everything. We do have a book over here that lists a lot of the teachers that taught in Mount Holly School and their pictures. Let's see how far it starts back. Goes back to, well, 1961. Put that back in. And it gives their name and their picture, what they looked like back then. This was my 2nd grade teacher right here, Miss Davenport. She was taught in the 3 big buildings that we were talking about. And let's see how far back it goes. See, we have colored pictures now. Oh goodness, it's kind of gotten used, so I don't know where the last date would be. But this is saying 86, 87, 88. And this says 1990, I think, and 1989, 90. So, and then I don't know if they do it anymore, keep a book like this, but it would be wonderful to have all the teachers in our schools. So we're always trying to add more history. So I think that's pretty much it. So better come on down to the museum and see what we got.
This is the mill room. This was one of the first rooms that we did here at the museum. I want to just walk around and talk about the main exhibits. This quilt here was given by Richard Brown and his sister Alice Albright. This came from the Tuckasegee Mill and was manufactured there, and their grandfather, I think, was superintendent of the school there. And then this is a picture of Edgar Love, who was manager of the store. This is, for those of you that know Jim Love, this was his great-grandfather. Mills in Mount Holly were a big deal. There's a map here that shows, I think there are 11 mills that used to be here in Mount Holly, which represented thousands of jobs and families that worked in the mills. And then when all the mills moved out of town, a lot of these jobs moved away, and people had to find jobs otherwise. this location where we are here, this is Historical Society here in the middle. This sewing machine down here came from the Mount Holly Cotton Mill. Pam Friedel gave that to us. This was not in the original mill, but something they added later when they did some additional garment manufacturing. And here on the wall is a picture of all the mills that were owned by American Neeford. We took this from the letterhead of one of their some correspondence. I believe this building is the current Mount Holly City Hall here in the middle. It was sold to by A&E later. American Neeford used to be called American Yarn and Processing, AYP, and then later merged with Eford Manufacturing and became American and Eford. Many of us worked for A&E, or if you didn't work there, members of your family worked there. So it's been a big contributor to the history of Mount Holly as it developed. This up here, this is a picture of Mr. Hutchinson. He was the president of A&E for many years. And then I think his son was president for a few years before it moved into non-family presidents. A&E gave us a lot of the artifacts. In this case, one we'll see later. These are threads that they manufacture today still in Mount Holly. Mount Holly still has one of the few operating mills in Gaston County. Threads are used in a lot of ways now that they weren't traditionally used, like in the manufacturing of seat belts and helping for parachutes, in addition to manufacture of a lot of garments, embroidery threads, and consumer uses. Over here we've got this bin came from one of the A&E mills, and one of the more modern things, and they used it to roll around product before and after manufacturing. We have here kind of a little timeline or chronology from a cotton boll to a small cotton bale to cotton that's gone through some of the cleansing steps and eventually put on bobbins for thread and moved into bigger threads, and eventually dyed and turned into products like these little threads that everybody has in their house. And up here we've got a window that came from the building that's now the Mount Holly Municipal Complex. They had an extra one, so they gave that to us. So when we put it here in the museum, we set it into the wall and put a picture on the outside to kind of show that as if we're in the mill looking out into a mill village. This actual mill village shown in this picture did not come from Mount Holly. It's just one that we thought was representative of that look from those times. And here on the wall we have these articles of Confederation by the American Neeford Mill, and these are the original minutes that document how the business got started. One of the more famous events in Mount Holly was the flood of 1916. In 1916, in July, 2 hurricanes converged and dropped like 20 inches of rain up in the foothills and mountains of North Carolina. And a lot of that water ultimately came down to the Catawba River and flooded the Catawba River, which flooded Mount Holly and Belmont and many communities along the way. This mill here, Mountain Island Manufacturing, was located in the Lucia vicinity, and that entire mill and facility was wiped out by the flood. There's several things here that tell the story of the flood. This bell here was on the top of the mill buildings. It was found in the mud by Perry Roberts many years later. And the Roberts family kept it in their home and then eventually gave it to the city, and it made its way here. We have here several samples of bobbins that came from various mills and various types of equipment. And the cotton comes from the bale, goes through the spinning machines, and eventually ends up as thread on these bobbins. And here on the wall, a lot of mills did this, took pictures of their staff, and the one on the wall is one of the best ones we had. It's from October of 1938. This is the Mount Holly finishing plant. One mystery that we have is whether this is what people wore to work or did they dress up on picture day. We just don't know because there's no one around from that era that can tell us a little history of what happened on picture day.
Welcome to our military room. We want you to take a look at what we have in here, artifacts that have been donated to us by family members of their loved ones that served the United States of America in the armed forces during times of war and of peace. It goes far back as the Revolutionary War. Looking at dates 1775 to 1899, serving our nation in the American Revolution, the Civil War, 1900 to 1950, in a world at war, World War I and World War II. Hot and Cold Wars, 1951 through 1990. We have Korea and Vietnam. 1991 to present, facing a new threat. And we have pictures of our soldiers, both male and female, that served. We have one of our hometown people, Lieutenant Casey S. McCarter. This was his uniform. We have special honor awards to Captain Brian T. Smith, have Defense Superior Service, Legion of Merit with 3 gold stars, Bronze Star with V for Valor, Defense Meritorious Service. And these were some local soldiers. This was Badger Johnson. We have donations from the military sleeping pad, their sleeping bag cover, combat boots, helmets, excuse me, Corporal Arthur L. Leonard served in the Army World War I, 1st Infantry Division, Big Red 1, battle fatigues. Beautiful cross stitch by J.L. Oren, 2003. We have more artifacts here. And we are so proud of our men and women that have served our country. And we have been honored to receive all types of donations that was given to us. This is my brother's uniform. Staff Sergeant Willie C. Lucky. He served in the Air Force. This was his dress uniform. Arthur L. Leonard, Army World War I. The winter dress uniform, World War II, Dr. A.U. Stroop. I remember him as a child. He was a doctor here in the town of Mount Holly. This is the male Navy enlisted dress uniform from World War II, Willie B. Ryan. James Southers, Marines, World War II. Men's Army dress blue uniform, Command Sergeant Sergeant Major Raymond C. Vanny. And we are so proud to show you all of the things that we have here. There's so much to come and learn and see while you're here. We also have a video that we have all of the soldiers that have been given to us that we put on a monitor and you can come and view it. There's several things to come in and see, and each branch of the service is represented. The Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, United States Coast Guard, and the Air Force. This is our female Class A uniform, Major Cher Orts. And this is Nicholas Edward Batchelor, World War II, Army Air Corps, 5th Air Force, Western Pacific Theater. We would love to have you come and visit us here at the Mount Holly Historical Society Museum. Thank you.
Good morning. It's nice to have you with us today. And I'm Camille Jessen. I'm a docent at the Historical Museum in Mount Holly. And I'd like to share the room that we treasure in our museum. It's our church room. So I think we'll start over at this board sign. This is a sign that if you were interested in finding out about where your church originated from, this might be a tool that you would use or could use to determine where your church originated from. It's a sign that tells about the early Christian church. The very earliest Christian church was the Roman Catholic Church, and we are so fortunate to have the St. Benedictine Monastery out at Belmont Abbey, and we also have a small Catholic church, St. Joseph's, which is up off of Main Street. It no longer is used except for very special occasions. But our churches have developed from the Catholic Church. Then we went into the Protestant movement with Martin Luther and the Lutheran Church. And then all the branches, the Methodists, the Mennonites, the Presbyterians have all come from those particular branches of worship. Now I'd like to show you one of the oldest artifacts in our museum, especially in our church room, and that is our pump organ. This is a pump organ, and it gets its name because there are pedals at the bottom of the organ that you must pump. If I press the keys, no sound comes out. But if I pump the organ, I will get sound. And when we have our school children visiting with us on school tours, we let the children come over and pump the organ and make sounds, and they really enjoy that. I'll ask them, what do you think this is? And of course they call it a piano because that's what they're most familiar with. But a pump organ, or a reed organ as it sometimes is called, back in those days, pianos were much more expensive than this organ. This organ cost the Lutheran Church $86, and that was quite a bit of money back in those days. But small churches could not afford a piano, so they went to the pump organ to help provide their music. This one was given to the museum by the L.R. Underwood family. They were members of the Lutheran Church, which the Lutheran Church, being the oldest church in Mount Holly, it's still in use, and it's across the street from our museum, and you can go into it. It's a beautiful sanctuary. but they have a pipe organ in there now. Above our pump organ, we have an oil lamp. I don't know how old this oil lamp was, but back in those days before electricity, of course, if they needed light, that this would be a way that they received light, and the person who was playing the organ could have the light on through the oil lamp. We have several hymnals that came from different churches in Mount Holly. This is a Baptist hymnal. This one here, I'm not sure about that one. These two books came from the Lutheran Church. They're hymnals of different eras. This is a Free Will Baptist hymnal, and this is a Methodist hymnal. All these hymnals have beautiful hymns in it that those denominations enjoy singing. And some of them even have worship services in them. I know these two. And it gives them guidance as how to lead their worship service on a Sunday morning. So we're thrilled to have those. Let me show you about some of the stained glass windows that we have here. In the Lutheran Church, there are 3 main stained glass windows, and they are still in the church today. They're beautiful. The church building itself was built in 1903, but in 1916 they remodeled a little bit and they put these beautiful stained glass windows in. Some people call them art windows, some of them call them memorial windows, because most of them are given by families to memorialize a loved one. The one in the middle is the Good Shepherd window. And in 1916, the church became officially the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd. It's the stained glass window that faces Main Street, and if you look at it from Main Street, that is the window that you see. The window on the right is called the Garden of Gethsemane, and that window shows Jesus kneeling in a garden. It was called Gethsemane, and it's where he went to pray before his crucifixion. And if you remember the story, his disciples fell asleep. They couldn't stay awake while he was praying. The window on the left, it shows a picture of Jesus knocking at the door, and that window is called the light of the world. Jesus is knocking on our door, and we need to open the door to let him come in. So that's what that represents. Those are beautiful windows, and if you ever have a chance to enter that church, take note of those. Now we have some replicas also of other stained glass windows in our churches from Mount Holly. This is a picture of a stained glass window from the First Presbyterian Church. And then over here are 2 stained glass windows from the First Presbyterian Church. And you may note there are names and dates, and those were given by those particular families to adorn the church, First Presbyterian. We have a stained glass window from Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, and our Second Baptist Church has a stained glass window. That's that one there. It looks like a Christmas window, has the manger. And then Tuckasegee Baptist has also a beautiful stained glass windows. I think the colors in that are especially pretty. These over here, there are 3 that came in the early Methodist Church. And I believe the top one shows the Garden of Gethsemane, like the one we saw at the Lutheran Church. The Good Shepherd, just like the one or similar to the one at the Good Shepherd, and then the last one is Jesus calling the children to come to him. Those are awfully pretty windows. The window over here is a replica of the First Methodist stained glass windows today. They built a new church, and I'll tell you a little more about that later, but their windows are very pastel if you go in to the Methodist church, and very calming, I think, but they're beautiful too. This one it looks like a Lenten cross with the victory crown from the Macedonia Baptist Church. So our stained glass windows are an important part of our church history. You know, the church in Mount Holly was a wonderful place, as it still is. It was a place for the people in the community to go and worship, but it also was a place for them to gather for social gatherings, and that they did plenty of. Let me show you behind John here is a replica of an altar. We have two churches in Mount Holly that I know have altars, and that would be the Lutheran Church and St. Joseph's Catholic Church, which is on Main Street North. And I'll tell you a little bit about our altar. If you go into a church with an altar, you usually will find candlesticks, and light is a very important part of the Christian church. We have a crucifix cross with a figure on it, and I know that represents the Christ. And we have a Bible, of course, that tells the story of the Christian church. A chalice, which is important as they distribute communion to their congregants. And this is a stole. Call it a stole. It sort of gives the importance of the minister or the priest in the church. They're the ones who lead the worship services, and this is just an identification for them to wear. Not all churches have stoles for their pastors or their ministers, but many of them do. Those that do usually are more what we call liturgical churches. Those are churches that follow a church year calendar. Okay, let's see. Let me show you a little bit about some of the history in this room. If you're interested in your church, perhaps the First Baptist Church, you could come in here, and we have notebooks with the history of many of our churches. Some of them are our churches on Main Street, some of them are the churches in the outlying area. But we're blessed with the churches sharing their history with us. This is a Catawba Heights Baptist Church history book that they wrote. And let's see, this one is Centerview Baptist Church, which is a church not too far outside the city limits of Mount Holly. We have some pretty colored pictures, just all kinds of information about churches that the churches. This was a picture of the First Baptist Church. I believe it was about 7 years ago that they had a terrible fire, but they are now back in their church. And this is information about the First Baptist Church, how it was developed and where it is today. This is a little record of the First Methodist Church. The First Methodist Church used to be on the corner of Catawba Avenue and Main Street, but they sold that church and that piece of property and moved down across the railroad track to its present location, but it's still on Main Street. And it's the one that had those pastel windows in it that I thought are awfully pretty. But this is a nice record, and this is valuable to us because it's history written down. That's important. Let me show you some of the early church buildings in Mount Holly. And we have a wall. They're in black and white because early days our pictures were all black and white. This very top one is the oldest church in Mount Holly, still in operation, Good Shepherd Lutheran. And if you will notice, it does not have its stained glass windows in it. It was built in 1903. The windows were added in 1916. And they have built additions to that church. They have a beautiful educational parish life building that was built in 1988 that is a beautiful rendition. I think the architects kept the lines of the church intact, and it just adds a lot to our main street. Let's see, this is a picture of the First Baptist Church. It was on Main Street also. Let's see, this is Catawba Heights Baptist Church. It looks totally different today because it's a new building, a different building. These two churches came from our Presbyterian friends, and they were built on Main Street also. And then Tuckasegee Baptist is a church that's alive and well today, and this is a picture of their church. This church here, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, is now Woodlawn Funeral Home. But we had an Episcopal church for many, many years, and Father Hindle was the rector there. Okay, let's see. Let's walk over to our map. This is a map of the streets in Mount Holly. And when we were putting our information together, we had collected 61 churches in Mount Holly and the surrounding areas. And so we wanted to identify their locations. And we have listed them with a number. And then on our map, it has a corresponding yellow dot that represents where that church with that number is located in Mount Holly. So this is very helpful if you're doing research in the area. Have I missed anything? One thing I know I failed to show that I think is important too. Over in this corner, we have several plates. And a lot of churches, especially long ago, they like to have a commemorative plate made on special occasions. It might be the 50th birthday of that church or the 100th birthday of that church. And they wanted to preserve that date. And they would have plates made and either sell them to the community people that would be interested or members of their church. And I don't know that they do that anymore, I'm not sure, but these are three that we have. This is Wesleyan Methodist, and this is the First Baptist Church, and then this is First Methodist. And this picture is a picture of the First Methodist Church in the background, and it was on the corner, as I said earlier, on Catawba and Main Street. And these people were the men in their Sunday school. Look how many young people they had in their Sunday school. And that's a men's Sunday school class. I think that, or a men's Bible class, excuse me. I think that's astounding. Churches are still important today. We're having Churches are having some problems today. People are not entering them, but they're there. So when we need a church, we are well blessed with many churches in Mount Holly. Thank you.
Welcome to the Mount Holly Historical Research Library. This was donated in memory of Edward J. Ryan, who was a U.S. Navy retired, and it's dedicated to all who proudly called Mount Holly home. It doesn't look like a great big research library, but we do have some really neat books up here. We have some books on the Civil War, and some over here are World War II, and anybody that likes to research that. Sometimes we have school kids that come in that want to do a project. We have some extra books in here that are from about the county, Gaston County, that we are a part of, and so those are good. Over in this section, we have a lot of books on our textile mill village history that really got the town of Mount Holly booming whenever it got started. We do have some North Carolina reference materials that would have, some information on our city. There are some little booklets here, the history of Gaston County and from North Carolina, and it's compiled from some historical writings, and there's a lot of information in there. We have a couple CDs, just a few of them. We have Mount Holly Sports Banquet, the Hall of Fame banquet, and we have photos of some of those. This is the oldest one that I saw in 2007. There's several of those up here. And of course, some extra books, even on surrounding areas in Gaston County. I wanted to share this photo. This is a picture of a memorial in honor of J.P. Warren, in honor of those who served. It was in Mount Holly. I think they said it was Central Avenue, and it has listed a lot of veterans there. Actually, I think I can see my dad's name on there, but it was told to me that somebody might still have this. And if you are somebody that knows the location of this, we would love to have the actual memorial in our museum. I pulled out a few things here. A lot of times, like I mentioned before, the kids will come down and do projects. This was Michael Nixon's Mount Holly Middle School that came down just recently. It's their history club that they have. I'm told that he's no longer teaching there, which is sad. But anyway, they did a project where they took the storefronts and then they looked them all up, and there might be a little snippet of something on the back that they wrote. This one that I had open was our actual building here, the Mount Holly Historical Society building, what used to be our city hall. And on the back, he had a few things about it, that it was built from 1922 to 1929. It had tilted ventilation. I don't know what that is, but that will be interesting. It said it used to be blocked up with stone bricks. I didn't know that. The midsection had been changed lots of times, and actually they added a concrete and brick handicap ramp to the building, and it's out front. So research and get information and learn about our history at the same time. This is another project, a North Carolina history project from 1978. Cecilia Marie Clemmer did on the Mount Holly Cotton Mill, which is, that mill building is still standing today. And she has pictures. I thought it was really cool what it looked like. And then actually a map where it is. It's on this little Alsace Avenue down on the other end of town. This mill, it turned into the Alsace mill. But she has, and you can tell it's hand typed by a typewriter. And she has all that history in there. It's pretty long too. Has articles and other pictures in the back. The famous A.P. Ryan that was instrumental in building the cotton mill and making it happen. So yes, people can come and do projects. This is another little interesting book that I found. It's Gaston County Marriages from 1889 to 1895. Now there's just a few pictures in here, but mostly it's just documentation of who got married to who, back in that period of time. There's one that had a little picture, and this is all typed up. In the back, because I noticed it didn't seem to be in any kind of alphabetical order, but there is an index in the back, which will be helpful to find and it is in alphabetical order by person, so you can look and find and see who's there. I thought that was cool. I think it even had some of the marriage certificates or license or whatever it was they did back then. Let's see if I can find some. It's in the back, right here, with the Register of Deeds in Gaston County back in those days. Look how some of them were handwritten. Today or later on, they would be typed in, done on a computer and all that good stuff. So I thought that was an interesting find in here. This is a book that I was going to share. It is about the architectural heritage of Gaston County. And of course it's by city. So Mount Holly has a section. And it has some very interesting homes in this book. It also goes into some of the meals. It tells each home who owned it. It's got some of their meal homes, meal village homes. Here's the Augusta Ryan Cannon House. That's really neat. All the architecture there. The Dellinger Nance home. Some of our churches are in here. First Baptist Church. The William O. Gardner home. And the Ramesses Hunter house. That was way back in the day. The C.E. Hutchinson home. He was one of our founders in the mill history. Willis F. Holland home. Worked in the old Holland drugstore. So there's really a lot of stuff in here. And not just in, in Mount Holly, but in all the surrounding towns. Here's the old Mount Holly High School back in the day. So, I thought that was a really interesting book. Now, this book is all about the flood of 1916, which everybody talks about because it was so devastating back in the day. The flood waters came from western North Carolina, where the mountain areas are, so by the time it got to us, it was very devastating. It took out our big old Mountain Island mill, the bridges at the Catawba River, and this book is very interesting, and it puts out the communities, all the little red dots that were affected by the 1916 flood. It gives the history of it from not just our area, but in all of North Carolina. There's actually some really great pictures, a pictorial part of it, where pictures were made. Not this one was from Black Mountain, and let's see. It just gives a good pictorial history of what it looked like when it happened. And you know, the Mount Holly, we were very, you know, just proud of how Mount Holly came back from all of that. We even celebrated. This little paper was in the book here, and it was all about on the 100th anniversary in 2016, when we had just remembering how well our city came back from the devastation of this flood. And there's some pictures, and these pictures were donated from our museum. So that was cool. That's always a top subject. My grandmother used to ask me if I remembered the 1916 flood, and I just hated to say that I was not even born during that time. So Grandma, I don't know. But I've heard lots about it. This is an early picture of downtown Mount Holly. I'm not sure about the time, but looks to me like about the 50s and 60s era, because I could see the Gaston Theater there, one that I attended when I was a child. So I thought that was a nice picture to show. But I think our greatest resource in this whole library is the donation of the Mount Holly newspapers from 1945 to 2004, whenever Mount Holly News closed. I wanted to share a little bit of what's in it, and the oldest one I pulled out, so you can see how yellow it is, how fragile the pages are, and we really have probably the most history of Mount Holly in these pages, because it was written by the citizens that lived here during that time. And in 1940s, of course, the early 1940s, we were in wartime. So if you look at the pages, this is in February of 1945, you'll see a lot of history of the veterans, what they were doing that day, and the town whenever they were raising money for the war effort. Paper pickup here next Sunday by the American Legion. That was to go to the war veterans. I thought it was this article, all veterans of great wars are urged to join. And as we flip through just a little bit, we'll see some of the things that happened back then. The ads are really cute. This was River Valley Chevrolet back in the day. Also during that time, the March of Dimes was big because they were wanting people to give generously because of infantile paralysis, which is polio today. And we know today, because of vaccines, polio is not a thing. But this is an ad that the American Yarn and Processing Company put out for that. Let's see. Turn over. This is the woman's section. Mount Holly Women was a famous person that wrote this article. She did it anonymously, but I will share with you in a few minutes who it was. Here's Paul Durr. That was a famous store to shop for clothes. We have a lot of church news, and actually Somebody even put the Sunday school lesson in here. Here's another good store, the Quality Store, that was well known back then. And the news back then was just so family oriented, because if you had a birthday or you had a new baby born, it was in the news. Right here's some more with our boys in the service. That's a section where they're, updating people, some of our veterans. And look at the funny papers back then. The Lone Ranger's the only one in here that I see, but they've come a long ways too, especially the paper, even when it went to color later on. Our boys with the colors, another section on that. And this big ad, the whole page, let's back the Legion, join the Mount Holly Post. The wartime just kind of took over the paper. Let's see, we had two theaters back then, the Gaston Theater and the Holly Theater. And you can see the movies that they were playing. Nothing familiar to me. So here's the grocery store ad from the A&P. Look at those prices. Don't you wish we had some of those today? Westland Farms, healthy babies and pasteurized milk. Here, and this goes into the next month. But this to me is just the best history that you can have. It's written down. We know some of our history is told orally, and we do have in the museum some oral history that we have collected from citizens in the Mount Holly, just what they remember. There's also in the paper, I noticed that there's just a little tiny section of the colored news, but they had their part, but there was just not a lot of news from them back then. So I think we covered all of that. I just wanted to share this little bit. Remembrances of Mount Holly. This was Mary Dunn Warren. She was the author of the Miss Holly back in the day. And just a little bit about her. She was born in 1914 in Mount Holly. She attended Mount Holly High School. She was valedictorian of that class, and she also was a top female athlete. In her early 80s, she wrote letters over a 2-year period back in 1996 and through 98 of her memories of Mount Holly. She was a great historian. Of course, she had an article in the paper, and she wrote that local interest too. In her book, there's very early history of Mount Holly, way back into the 1700s. There's about all our churches when the 1800s came. There's very interesting stories about the churches and how they got started. The social life in Mount Holly I thought was very interesting because back then in the 1800s they had dances, musicals, home talent plays, they had box suppers, and I believe the A.P. Ryan building back in the day was down on the corner on Main Street. He had his office there, but upstairs he had an auditorium, is what she called it. They had a stage, and they had a lot of dances and things up there. They also had the Mount Holly High School graduation classes up there, had their graduation there. Mount Holly, she talks about, had fairs and street dances, and they also had tilting tournaments back in the day. Back in the horse and buggy days, she talks about Mount Holly's first street light. And I think the research says that it was located on the corner down there in the middle of town. Just one, that one. But the early homes that were here, the people that lived here in Mount Holly back then, all about the schools, and she goes back 156 years and tells us about the post office, how our mail used to come from Charlotte by horse and buggy way back in the days before there were paved roads. And then when our railroad came through, then of course the mail was delivered by railroad. And I think it went all the way to Brevard Station, which is Stanley today, and then it was distributed, out. So that was really a neat thing too. The room that we're standing in is where our Mount Holly Historical Society has programs. We usually try to have monthly programs, and we try to pick something historical, and we've just had some great attendance for that. Also, the table up there is where we have our board meetings, and you can just see a few of our extra vintage clothing and things back there. So this is a new find that we have acquired in the last year. Terry McManaway, who came and did a program for us, told us that there is a ton of history in our cemeteries. And he told us about a lot of the tombstones and what the markings meant. The greatest thing he did was the research on the Pine View Cemetery here in Mount Holly. This is a huge map of all the blocks, the plots, the lots, and the names of each of those people buried there. He also has located if they were veterans. You can see there's a Vietnam veteran here, World War II veteran. So that kind of history. He has left all of this donated to the library. It's 3 volumes here of the same stuff. It has 3 binders, the lots, the blocks, and the markers. He also gave us a thumb drive of all of this material, so we can hook it up in the computer and you can come in and look up your long lost relatives or whatever. This is the thumb drive files that are in there. And I think when you go on the thumb drive, you have more photos of some of the tombstones and stuff, like this one here. This is the plot section, because this book contains the A and B section. In the beginning, this is a list of all the names of everybody in the cemetery. It's in alphabetical order. It gives their location, which A, B, C plot or block that they're in, their date of birth, their date of death, and how old they are. So that goes on all the way in alphabetical order. Let's see. And this is how it starts out with the plotting. Let's see. This is block A. It has everybody's name that's in block A. And then it has the plot, just like that's on here, with everybody's name in it, so you can locate it. And then it goes back and shows us. And it still has the same information. Here's a Korea veteran, a Coast Guard. You know, you find out a lot of stuff in cemeteries. And if you ever want to do, or looking into your genealogy, and you were born and raised in Mount Holly, and look up where your relatives might be, this might be a good resource for you. The other 2 volumes are just the same, got the other blocks in those. So we're grateful that he donated that to us. And he did tell me that he was going to eventually do the city cemetery, that's what it's called, up there on the corner of Hawthorne and Catawba. That is one of the oldest cemeteries, and I'll really be interested to see who's buried there. And there's some really neat old tombstones. So he did do a lot of research on Find a Grave. You know, you can look up anything on there and find somebody's grave site. So that's pretty much our library here, and we hope that people will be able to come and use it.
I'm Janice McRory. I'm a member of the Mount Holly Historical Society, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about our general store. We have this set up to look like a general store in the 1800s and early 1900s. As the population grew in Mount Holly, they had to have a place they could go to buy things, and this was where they could buy salt and cloth, hardware. It was a place for ordering machinery or dry goods and grocery items, dyes and paints. There were 2 stores in town, and one was mostly a grocery store, and then the other one was a general store. I do want to talk about a couple of things in this area. First, the television here was from about the early 1950s, and it's black and white. That was all there was, and this probably cost about $1,000 then. There's a little photograph here on top of it that talks about aluminum ware, and that was something that was very prevalent then, that people didn't have a lot of other utensils for cooking. It was mostly aluminum. This item is a corn sheller, and the farmers would bring their corn in. It would go in the top, and then it would come out here, and they could use the corn, the cob that was left, for feeding their cattle, and they also used what was shucked off of the piece of corn to feed their cattle. This machine was used to stitch up bags, and if they had a bag full of corn cobs that they wanted to take back home, they could fill the bag up, which was over here, and this machine could actually be rented. You don't think that much about back then, somebody renting something like we have now, all the machine rental, but this was something that could be rented so that they could get their bags back home. This item is a receipt from Tucker and Springs General Store. It was about $36 for some items that they were buying and paid, so that person took their items home after they got the items picked up here. This piece of equipment is actually, it's an adding machine, and they use this to add up somebody's bill. So they would come in and operate the adding machine. I don't think it really works now, but it was a noisy machine when they used it. As I said, people in Mount Holly the population started growing, and other businesses began to grow to accommodate the needs. There came into town, or closer into the town area, a stable, offices, churches, doctors' offices. We had an ice house, and I remember when that was here. They sold ice by the bag and coal, I think it was. But the town grew, and the things that they needed grew. But this little general store type area, and if you notice, there are some things up here. A piece of aluminum ware was a cake pan. Things were always in tins, the Tetley tea bags, and here's a container of lard. Anybody that's used Crisco to bake a cake, now we really don't use that as much as we did, but there are a lot of the tin items up there that you could see came from a store like this. The iron, this was something that got heated in the fireplace, and then this is how they ironed some of their clothes. So a lot of these items have been given to us, but they were historically significant because of the way they were used in Mount Holly.